Hello and welcome to today's episode of Served by SHFM, your food service hospitality podcast. The Society for Hospitality and Food Service Management is a community of like-minded professionals seeking educational, developmental, and networking opportunities to enrich their personal and professional goals. Hello and welcome back to Served by SHFM, your food service hospitality podcast. We're your hosts, Michael Moore
and Danielle Pedersen.
In today's episode, we're going to take a deeper look at how to bring heart to the corporate world. We'll touch more on what that means in just a minute, but first, let's introduce our guest for today.
Today, we're joined by Mboone Umbima, the VP of Brand Strategy at Rio Coffee and Tea, and also the author of the best article I have written yet.
Yeah,
can we take it?
I was going to say, yeah, Danny, we have to talk about that. We have to talk about that article, please. So you wrote an article named The Best Article I Have Written Yet. And, you know, it's part of an ongoing session. By the way, I think I followed you on one of your, I think it was actually on your website. I'm the first follower that you have on there, which makes me the most important and best for all time. But the thing that struck Danny and I think, about that article was not just the content. The content I want to talk about, but that is a bold choice for the name of an article. How do you jump into that? How do you land there?
Oh gosh! First of all, thank you for having me. And you know, I'm in marketing, and so that definitely is a marketing strategy because, well, it's true. It is the best article I've ever written, but
yet
definitely,
but there's room to grow.
There's another one cooking, but. Yeah, because I took all the small pieces of wisdom that I have come through over the years, not just as a brand strategist, as an organizational development strategist, but also as a coach. And I just kind of made it simple and easy for anyone to be able to absorb it as fast as they can, because I had been writing a book and then I thought, well, then how do you spend the time, reading the book? How can I get this content to you efficiently and make it accessible efficiently? And so that's the story behind that.
And I think doing an article is a great idea, especially because, so many people only have so much time available to read something. So breaking out concepts into article size, bite size that they can scroll through on their phone makes that information more accessible. So heck yes.
Absolutely. And that's what the whole idea was.
And there was a lot of, I think, really good and most importantly, practical advice. And there's some advice you hear from these different, motivational speakers, which I feel like you qualify for. Everything that comes out of your mouth makes me want to do better than I am right now. But a lot of the articles that you read, they sometimes have a bit of, an unrealistic take on things. You're like, I can't do that. Maybe that's too much. But everything in there seemed very practical. The one thing that I think would be hardest for me is you asked for us to, in some cases, stop trying. Why would I stop trying? Because I'm one that if something doesn't work, I will continually smash my head against the wall until I get to the other side or I perish. So far I've gotten through, but I know it's not a good long-term plan. So what is the thought behind that?
No, because I'm sure you've experienced this over the years. I mean, all kidding aside, you keep banging your head and the answer is not going to come from that space. And so showing grace to yourself or even creating space for the possibility of what it is you are trying to accomplish is actually stopping, because really that's a big indicator that you're walking in the wrong direction. And so now it's like you are putting yourself in a position to argue, like with the GPS, it's telling you turn left and you're like, no, I'm going right. And it just keeps telling you to turn left. So the easiest accessible thing you can do at that point is just stop. And then when you stop, then you can start to go in a different direction. But that's why.
Is it in a lot of ways the smarter, not harder mindset?
Absolutely. Smarter, not harder. And here's the thing. I want to say something that I think is controversial, but I think in time it will catch on. Life does not have to be that hard. we make things
Doesn't.
so difficult for ourselves, especially
What?
when you're in these, senior roles, or you're trying to build your career and all that. You just start to grind, and, you get in the flow of grind, and it really doesn't have to be. It really doesn't.
I'm gonna work. That's maybe my New Year. Is it too early for a New Year's resolution? Depends
It's
on
never
when
too
we
early.
air. Yeah, depends on when we bring this up. Yeah, maybe that's my New Year's resolution, is to not stop trying. That sounds really depressing, but stop efforting when when it's clearly not working, and maybe be a little bit smarter about some things.
And I think that has so many applications, right? Because it's not just in your career, it's in relationships, it's in things that you do in your personal life. That doesn't mean that it's a good excuse to not go to the gym, but think about how you're approaching that. Like if you're just trying to hit a certain goal and you set the goal too high, stop doing that and then revisit it so that you can make that initiative work for you.
Yeah, and the thing that I would add is, whenever you're in a space of efforting, you usually are so narrow, like your focus is so narrow that you don't even see any other possibilities outside of what is happening for you. And that's why I say stop, because if you stop, then you can pull back and see. But then when you're in it like that, you really, as you said, you'll just keep banging your head, and you're not going to get,
Yeah,
you're not
that was
going to get a different alternative.
That was another great segment that you had in there, which was it was something along the lines of, and correct me on this, it was, you can't solve a problem in the same headspace in which you found yourself in that problem, or you got to that problem, something along those lines. And I thought that was really profound. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you identify a problem or an issue or something, you're in problem identity mode, if you will. So what you're likely to do, because everything gains momentum, everything is energy, you're more likely to see more problems. So really, any true new solution or thought process has to be arrived at from a different space. And really, this is for the bigger things we have going on. When you're thinking about systemic issues and all of that, you really do have to step back, because there's so much momentum and all those things. There's so much opinions, thoughts. And so it becomes very difficult to solve from that same perspective. I'll give an example, with diversity and inclusion. Yes, when we see bias and all these things happen, that same mindset, if you don't move out of that mindset, you will only solve at the basic level. So maybe you'll do anti-programs, anti-racism programs, anti-blah, blah. But in the larger picture, what we really want to do is make diversity and inclusion irrelevant, because it's a given fact. But in order to get to that space, you have to be in a different mindset.
Isn't some of that thought process, sorry, Danny, go ahead.
No, go for it, Mike.
Isn't some of that process that you talk about, if you're only contributing to anti-campaigns, you're not really getting where you want to go. Instead of, it's like an exclusion campaign versus an inclusion campaign.
Correct. And something I shared recently with my team is that, when it comes to some of these larger issues, we really cannot solve from the brain, because the brain is binary. So it's either right or wrong, yes or no, and that doesn't open you up to any possibilities. And the other piece, and I'm going to totally nerd out over here, is that, the most recent research in science, in physics, is showing that, our heart space has neurons, meaning that we can make decisions from the heart space. And when you make decisions from the heart space, it's no longer binary. You are now open to different ways of thinking about a different solution. And we've always done this. It's just the science is now catching up and showing us that this is how we are able to innovate. This is how we're able to put an end to, large problems like, smallpox and all these things that, one time were a huge issue in humanity and now have been solved. But that thinking that opens you up to so many possibilities doesn't occur in the binary thought system where there's right or wrong. It happens when you open up to absolutely anything.
So I'm so curious, how did you get to this point where you're looking and thinking about things from a heart space and not necessarily from a head space, right? Because everybody's just like, oh, it's all your brain smarts and whatnot. But obviously you're wildly successful. You're a VP of brand strategy. You've had a really successful career. Take us back to where that journey started with your heart space and how that kind of leads you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly enough, so I come from a family that's most of my family is in the nonprofit world, whether it's for animal welfare and conservation or children and women in marginalized countries and so on and so forth. So there's always been that part of me that's just felt like we have to do something to make a difference. But I didn't quite follow in those footsteps because I went into corporate America. But even within corporate America, I've always had my foot in the philanthropy space. So like, for instance, when I worked for the Compass Group, I worked with Bank of America with the Kidney Foundation. Right now, in my current role, I work with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. So there's that piece to it. But also, I have always had an intrinsic knowledge that a lot of the turmoil that we have, not just in the world, in the office space, in the corporate space, is based on fear. And the opposite of love is not hate, actually fear. And fear will motivate you to do things that don't want.
No, we'll just keep going. I think you're on a roll, and I love what you're talking about. And
okay, because I was hearing background noise, and so I was like, should I pause? Okay.
It's just a ghost in the system. It's fine.
Okay, so yeah, the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. And when you are operating from a space of fear, one, you cannot learn. You can only learn when you're in a space, when you feel safe, when you feel comfortable. When you're fearful, you protect yourself. And protection comes in different ways, whether it's not cooperating with your workmates or sabotaging a campaign or just not committed to, giving 100% or bringing your whole self, but it shows up in all those ways. When we're fearful, we clamor. And so I think I remember almost like yesterday when it hit me, like when that epiphany hit me. I know I was 21 because it was just shortly after my birthday and I was able to go and buy alcohol in the United States. So I remember it like it was yesterday.
Hello.
Which is saying something because usually people don't remember much after that.
I'm like, I'm legal.
We all totally wait.
But I say that because, so it's like I knew it intrinsically, and then I went to school, I learned it, I learned the science and all of it. But I recently heard from, I was watching one of these big names in the world of quantum physics who was saying that, the intellect can only take you so far. And he was talking about it from a frequency perspective, like your intelligence will only take you so far, after which it becomes a problem. It's the very thing that then does not allow you to be able to evolve even higher. And so, like, for instance, when we talk about efforting or, putting all your effort into something that's not working, usually it's because you're using all your intellect to try and figure it out. And the answer will not come from there. And therefore you have to stop and step back and look at it. But so this is why I kind of came up with that whole idea of my secret agenda is to bring back love to the workplace. And by love, what I mean is being in a space to be open, to bring your whole self, to be able to give your full talents, because if everyone was to come into the office and give their full talents, we would be much further along than we are with all our corporations and everything that's possible for all of us. But we cannot do that if we come into spaces fearful.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but I assume we now have probably 10 million listeners, maybe more, maybe a lot more than that. Yeah. I mean,
whole world.
I don't want to throw billions around, but probably on the low end. So your
deal.
secret, yeah, mahogany everywhere over here, but the secret's going to be out after this, which I think is awesome because it's a topic that, we're going to dive into more in just a minute, but I love the idea of taking something when you think about corporate. I don't know. I always think about stainless steel and white walls and, policy and cookie cutter. And you're talking about something that is just at its base, almost, it seems like the antithesis of that, which is heart, which is operating on feeling and understanding and compassion and empathy. That it's hard to marry those ideas at first glance, but I love that you're pioneering a way to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, you bring up a good point. This is the thing, like with my background in organizational development, we've come from an industrial age, and the reason why organizations look the way they look today is based on that model. And so that model served us then, but in order for us to evolve into whatever it is that we are becoming by way of innovation, by way of profitability, sustainability, and so forth, it has to come from a different mindset. It cannot come from the same, because if you keep doing the same things, you get this result.
And for our listeners, the Industrial Revolution was in the 1800s. So we're working with an organizational mindset that's over 150 years old. That's not how one innovates.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And I'll say that, I mean, there are many organizations that have made a conscious effort to kind of make this shift. I mean, I would say our company is doing that. Companies like LinkedIn have like leaders in mindfulness and things like that. And the reason you're seeing these things come up is because there's actually a direct correlation to employee engagement, retention, profitability, innovation. Because when people bring their whole selves to work, then the possibilities become much more endless than when they come, within this limited mindset.
So I think that's a really good launching point for my next question, because you're really known for making people be aware of their comfort zone and try and pushing them out of it. Right. And so as we're talking about these organizations that have things like mindfulness, and I know some of our listeners are probably like, oh, well, that seems like some new age nonsense that these millennials are bringing into the workspace.
ET millennials.
There's an actual science to it. And so talk to us a bit about how you yourself have pushed you out of your own comfort zone, and how you've helped your team members get out of that comfort zone as well.
So it's a work in progress. That's such a great question. It's a work in progress, and it depends on what your goals are, your intentions are. Where I start off with, if there's something that's not in your experience, your current experience, that you want, and it's not there, it means it resides outside your comfort zone. Otherwise, you'd already have it. And that's why I will push, because people will have dreams. They'll say, one day this, one day that. Well, that day could be today, but the only thing in your way is you. And the only way to do something different is to actually start building that muscle, because it is a muscle. And so I always say, start off by taking a new route home, or just doing something that you don't normally do. Because the moment you start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, you open yourself up to possibilities, you open yourself up to see different things, opportunities. And then now you have access to that thing that you wanted that you don't yet have in your experience. And so, I mean, with the team, it's the same way. Like when I spot the limited viewpoint, then I'll challenge. I'll say, is it outside of your comfort zone? then what makes it outside your comfort zone? And then we'll go down that route. But I usually will pull this in when people are feeling they're dissatisfied, or we are trying to think of, a new solution to something.
And I think this really ties into what you were touching on before, where people operate from a place of fear in a lot of their workspaces. And so there's that fear of failure that a lot of people have, where they're like, I don't want to try something new because I don't want to do bad, or I'm just starting this new job, so I'm going to try and hide my mistakes. And that doesn't really help them get out of their comfort zone, because you're not getting that feedback. You're not learning how to grow and improve. So just wanted to tie that together.
No, absolutely. And cultures is what a company culture is what will determine how that ambiguity or learning process is taken. If the culture is closed, just like, in the same way, then outside comfort zone is not going to be tolerated. But there's so many other predictions I can make about that company in terms of their innovation and how long they'll stay in business. And so I think even employers are having to look at their cultures and seeing, are these cultures open? Are these cultures learning cultures? Are these cultures helping us grow? Are they inclusive? And so on and so forth. But you make such a great point, Danny.
So you've built a career on making people uncomfortable in a good way, thinking, instead of pushing through a problem, thinking around it. Obviously, you're doing wonderful things at David Rio, and you're trying to inject heart into a setting that doesn't seem on its surface like it can fit, which we know it can be done, and it should be done. And I think, everything you're doing is an amazing first step to generating awareness and actually putting it into practice at David Rio. But, one thing that you always talk about is authenticity, and being authentic in your intentions. And what does that mean, and how does that work with all of this together?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because authenticity is not that complicated, but it can be, depending on how far away you have gone from yourself.
Fair enough.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I think that's a good point, because a lot of the times when somebody's introduced, right? So they'll introduce themselves with what their job is, but that's not who they are as a person. That doesn't tell you anything about them.
No.
When my partner introduces himself to people, it's always like, I'm an international jiu-jitsu practitioner, and he's like ranked. And then at the end, he's like, and I'm an engineer, and I am a cloud economist. Like, the job is at the end.
Right, absolutely. And, this is the beauty of life. Really, we get to define what that is. We get to define what that is for ourselves. And if you, for me specifically, authenticity meant a number of things, because as I've shared probably with the both of you before, like I was born and raised in Kenya, but moved around a little bit. And so over the years, like, I picked up different different accents, different ways of thinking. And at some point I got exhausted, and I just decided I was going to be me. So that means then, what is me? What is me is this accent that I have that's kind of weird. It has some twang in it, and it has some British water in it. It has all these things going on in it, but this is me. In addition to that, and then I define it further in the sense that I want to be, and I am being, a catalyst for change, in that for me, what I want my legacy to be is introducing this concept of heart into this, what seems like to be a cold space. And so, but that's something I defined for myself. So after I defined it for myself, then I move in the world with it. And for me, that's what authenticity means. So one, it's being comfortable in your own skin as you are, and trusting that people will receive you just fine. Because I think a lot of us are not authentic because we think that who we are is not cool enough or smart enough or just not enough. And it really is. And I can't tell you that every day I feel like I'm enough. It's a work in progress. But there are some days I wake up and I'm like, high five, Mboone, you're killing it. I mean, but it's something that I have to, I work on and I make sure that I'm present to.
I feel like that's something, just the idea that you're not enough is something that is so embedded in our culture for long. And, it's something that I'm a parent of two young humans that we're trying, I think everybody tries to do better than, whatever experience they had. And I had a great and privileged experience, but at the same time, there are things where we look at our kids, we're like, I never want my daughter to have a body image issue or my son to have a body image issue. Or I never want them to think that just because they're not good at something means they're not good at anything, or that they shouldn't keep trying. Like, just because all these things that you just said, it made me look back. You have those flash moments of when you were a kid, and I just thought of like pretty much everything up until really I became a dad, I think, when perspective for me changed drastically. And I wish we could get that mentality and find a way to work that into people just going into our industry or any industry, that no matter where you're at, you're good enough. You're doesn't mean you can't be better and you don't want to be better, but you're still good enough for you. And that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts with the leadership at the very top, because when you model that behavior, then that tells everybody that it's okay to be yourself and you are good enough. And so I think it starts at the top. And then in addition to that, like recognizing so when you look at an organization, and I'm going to try and keep this I'm going to try and not nerd out on this one, but you gotta understand.
Nerd away.
Go for it.
You got to understand how the connectivity within networks. So you need the leadership to model this, and then you need the Mbones of this world who are in the organization already, kind of carrying that torch to spread that. And so you specifically work with people that you identify within the network that are carrying that, in order to infuse it into the culture, if it's something that you are intentionally incorporating it into your company. But yeah, it starts with leadership. It starts at the very top.
It's like having a conscious leader, which I know is like a leadership style is conscious leadership. Where, it talks exactly about what you're talking about, where, you don't have to be so achievement driven. Like, that's nice, but don't let that deduct from who you are, or essentially having you be entirely wrapped up in achievement. And I think that American culture really is so heavily focused on you hitting certain mile markers and getting certain achievements. And if you don't hit those, well, then obviously you're not good enough to do that, when that's not the case. That's just the way that our current system is laid out. And I really appreciate that you are pushing people to think outside of the current system. Like, we acknowledge that things aren't entirely optimal, so we have to really think critically about it in order to change it. And so moving from that, you're navigating through this corporate world, and we all know that corporate language can be a bit of a hassle to learn, especially if, one, English isn't your first language, and two, if, you're not used to speaking that. And I know for people like us that tend to be very heart focused, it's you're too emotional. But how did you learn to find that correct corporate language to have your message reach the people that it needs to reach most?
So this is the beauty of, and that's such a great question. This is the beauty of the age that we're living in right now, because as I had mentioned a little bit earlier, it's like the science has finally caught up with what it is that a lot of us intrinsically know, even if we may not always practice. And so with that said, it has become easier to build a business case around this. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, so here's the thing. Culture drives strategy. And in order to have a culture that's going to drive your strategy, you have to invest in how that culture is. And investing in that culture means that you have to retain your employees. You have to engage your employees. You want your employees to show up fully so that they're giving you all the possibilities that are available to you. Especially like here in the United States, we're moving away from a model where a lot of our jobs are process driven, and it's more about innovating in the IT and all these things, and therefore it's more important than before to be able to come to the table with outside of the box thinking. And so in order to do that, then we have to start looking at tools that we didn't have before. And these are things like mindfulness. And they're collecting all this data now, and they're able to show the productivity, they're able to tie that back to the profitability of a unit, a team, an organization. And really that's how it's been possible to incorporate this language, this work within the corporate environment.
So, we've covered so much here where, we've gotten to know a little bit about your background. You have you were raised in different countries, you have different accents that make you up, but then you found that those are experiences that help shape you, but not necessarily you. And you found what makes you comfortable in your own skin. And every day that's an evolution. And from there, you've found and landed yourself in a position where not only can you continue to grow that way, but most importantly, I think you can set an example for many other organizations out there as to why it's so important to invest in the individual and invest in employees and not numbers necessarily. And that by doing the first one, you get the second one in a much more efficient and better way. But, all of the ideas are so big, I think sometimes as a manager out there, whether you're in HR or GM or whatever, for our listeners, they might look at this and say, those are all great ideas. I don't know where to start. What advice can you give to somebody that wants to take what you're saying to heart? What small things can they do to get started?
Yeah, great question, Michael. The first thing that there are different places you can look over here. The first one I would say is you, as the person that wants to make the change, start going outside your comfort zone, period. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. Doesn't mean that you get the whole team to Disney like next week, but it's not a bad idea, but it's something small. Take a different route home, talk to somebody you've never spoken to before in the team. It's just do something different that you haven't done before, and keep a tally on it every day. Make sure at least you do it once or twice, because what starts to happen is it's like you open yourself up, and then you start generating new thoughts for yourself and new ways to think about whatever issues you are dealing with within the organization. Or you start to see different gaps that weren't so obvious to you. But that's because you're not sitting in the same space that discovered this issue, or that I need to change, or we need to do something differently. So the first thing I'd say is just start by doing something outside of your comfort zone, something that you don't do every day, because that starts to build the muscle, that starts to give you different perspective. And then I would say, on a practical note, if you are dealing with, if there's a specific project you're working on that you're trying to solution or whatever, try and take on that project with a different lens. So I don't know if that means using another team to think through it that's not an expert in that area, because while they might give you very elementary or just not expertise solutions, you might find that there's a thought process that's introduced that's returned to the primary team that they can work with and develop. So it really boils down to just change it up, just do something different and see where you're going. And the thing about this is that every time you do something different and outside your comfort zone, it's like you become more confident on how to move forward. So when you start out, it might feel a little discombobulating because it's like, okay, I did that didn't feel great, whatever. But after a while, It's like you become more confident and more directed, and therefore now you can actually start curating things. You can start being intentional with this new way of thinking, this new process. But that's why I say it's a muscle. You have to build the muscle up so that then it powers you in moving in that direction.
That's awesome. And it makes me think too about how we approach creativity. So a lot of people, if you ask them if they draw or something, they're like, oh, I could draw a stick figure. But what you're asking people to do is be creative, to find something new, do something different, and approach things from that creative aspect. So I think it's also about empowering your team members to be creative and to get into that space where you can kind of approach things from that childlike wonder. And that's where we see a lot of successful artists thrive in, is that they can approach things from that sort of perspective. And so we're just trying to get other people to think like artists a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll give you an example. In our organization, many years ago, one of our founders had a glass of fizzy water, and then she put in a Altoid, and she came up with a concept called Metromint. Simple like that. And Metromint went on to become a very successful brand, which was later on sold off. But, you know, creating that space so that you're able to do things like that. And so at David Rio, we have these moments where we spend just thinking about different products or different ways of doing things. Even our meetings, we keep on changing them up. Like our quarterly meetings, we'll try this, we'll try that, but it just keeps the space and energy open, allowing us to all have a different experience.
It reminds me a lot, Danny, of our conversation with Kevin Dorr a few weeks ago, where he was talking about how all the changes in our industry in food service and hospitality have spurred a lot of innovation. And the idea of failing forward has been embraced more, where employees are being given the latitude and the liberty to try things that they weren't traditionally accepted, or to try things that are new or different. And yes, they probably fail more often than they succeed. But I think the empowerment that comes with that liberty, the thought that my employer, my company, my colleagues will value my effort, even if it's outside of my comfort zone, if it makes me uncomfortable, but I'm still trying and embracing that challenge. And, you know, maybe you find something great. And it sometimes it is as simple as, you know, a mint and some carbonated water.
Boom. And I'd say, like, you know, something like Slack. I mean, we all use Slack now, and that was a mistake. They were trying to make something else, and it failed. But now see this product that is being used by, you know, several organizations, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. And so I always come back to, what is failure? I mean, we can deconstruct what failure is, because it could be prototype 1, prototype 2, or whatever. But yeah, what is failure? I think there's an opportunity there to really, in order for us to gain from it, I think we need to shift how we define it.
And I think that's a great thought and question for our listeners to ponder. Well, I want to say thank you so much, Mboone, for taking the time out of your super busy schedule to chat with me and Mike. But before we end, we want you to reach back in time and tell yourself, just when you were starting out, what advice would you give little baby Mboone on her professional journey?
Little baby Mboone. No, I mean, like when you're starting out, like everybody looks back and says, "I wish I could have." What is your "I wish I could have" moment? You know, what is that thing that you would tell yourself that you think would be the most impactful?
I wish I worried less, and I wish I just went with the flow more, because, you know, originally I'd say I was following a script, as we all are. It's like, first I'm going to be manager, and then I'm going to be blah, blah, and then I'm going to be blah, blah, and then I'm going to work here and there. And that is the surest way to create disappointment for yourself by having that kind of expectation. And the moment I let go and just go with the flow and just take on new opportunities, stuff that are happening for me. And so I would say just let go with the flow. And we all have scripts just by the function of being human. And so become conscious of that script so that you can rewrite it and it can be one of your choosing.
I love it.
Fantastic.
It's simple and applicable and profound at the same time. I love it.
Yep, because your first draft is always the worst.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Served by SHFM, your food service hospitality podcast. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed on today's episode are not necessarily those of SHFM or any of its members.